Welcome to season one, episode 6 of Here to See the Shelbourne. And on the eve of the 2025 Women's Premier Division, we've broken the bank and blown our budget to get the best voice on all things in women's football, a Shelbourne legend. And I'm not talking about Dunny. A very big welcome to former Raheny Arsenal, Ireland, and Shelbourne defender Seana Cooke. Welcome, Seana. How was the
Thanks.
very long off season for you?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Yeah, it was very long. That was a very kind introduction. I was about to say that definitely wasn't passed by the Shels powers that be, because you definitely would have had a lot taken out of that. But now the off season was it was long. For me, I'm a League of Ireland diehard, League of Ireland before anything else. So I'm delighted to have it back again. We've gathered a bit of excitement and momentum with the men's games that have kicked off earlier, and I'm super excited to be a part of the start of this season with you and the gantry on Saturday, and I look forward to hopefully a good competitive league.
Well, we'll get to that shortly. I'll have to brush up on my notes for Saturday afternoon. It's not often that we're joined by Shelbourne royalty in the commentary box, so the red carpet, and I'm sure I'll have to bow to you at some stage as we welcome Shamrock Rovers on Saturday afternoon. So let's have a very quick word. I know you're a busy person last weekend, but the President's Cup took place. Shels won 2-1 against Athlone. Nice to get a trophy in the cabinet. Nothing much to take from that result, though, is there?
Yeah, like I think it look from the perspective of the game itself, I was kind of expecting a bit more beforehand in terms of like media attention, and just we barely heard anything about the game, which I thought was a bit disappointing. Um, but then all of a sudden on the day, I think Athlone announced about 16 players. I think they were only short announcing the new pope at one stage. The names that are coming out, but I thought that kind of was a bit strange to do. Like going into a cup game and announcing 16 players in the day of it, I think thought was it doesn't look great either. So yeah, the game itself, like it's always good to start off the season with a bit of silverware. You kind of automatically have that little bit of confidence, and we've seen some of the younger players get time as well, which was nice. It's nice to have that game at home, but in terms of in the grand scheme of things, I would expect and hope that the backroom staff, the powers that be at Chelsea, the players before that game, during that game, and straight after were just focused on the league, and it was put to bed pretty quickly because in the grand scheme of things, it's nice to have a cup, but at the end of the year, let's hope it's not the only thing we have to remember.
I fully agree. Now, I'm going to start you off with a nice soft question here, Shauna. Now, the cup win last October was a nice way to put a bit of a shine at the end of the season, but why did Shels not win the league last year?
Um, like my opinion on it is, we had the squad there. On paper, like you look at from our one to whatever number we had, 24, whatever it was. Like we should have won that league. I personally thought we should have won it very easily. I think it came down to just a bit of naivety in terms of decision making about starting 11s, and the one game in particular that stands out to me was the home game against Athlone in Tolka Park. Now you could put it down to a decision that was made by a referee. At the end of the day, sometimes you get those decisions, sometimes you don't. You can't, your league success or the fate of where you land in the league should never be blamed on a moment like that. I think management have to look back and look at decisions that were made. The two Athlone games, the one away in Athlone at the start of the season that was kind of thrown away, and then the one in Tolka Park. To me, Athlone should have won that game comfortably. They missed about 4 or 5 chances in the first half. We gifted them so many opportunities, and just down to bad finishing. They went in one at half time. There's two games in the history of Shels women's team that I felt like a real franticness from the bench. One was the cup final against Athlone where they won on penalties, and then the second one was that game. It was like a strange franticness from the line. I think we brought on Megan Smith-Lynch in midfield or something at one stage as well. There were strange decisions. Um, and I just felt like it was at Lowndes from there on out. I think in the opposite kind of dugout, you had Kieran Kilduff had his hands tied, I think, with a lot of things during the season, resources, hadn't had the players available to him, maybe that other squads have had. He lost, for me, he was the best player up until a certain point. Can't think of her name now. She moved to the UK, off the top of my head, but Kerry Ann then got injured, and he just had this kind of controlled measuredness. I think he's got the experience as a player playing at the highest level to know what was needed to kind of guide the team through. And I'm not slating anyone when I say that, but I just think it was a naivety from kind of the bench. That kind of resulted in the league position being what it was come the end of the year.
Yeah, Shels got off to I wouldn't call it a sloppy start, but they certainly drew it. The very first game they drew it at home, 0-0 to Sligo. At that level, Shauna, when you have 20 to 22 league games, even a draw sometimes is as bad as a defeat because you just don't have that time to catch up. And Shels, it was a bit of a sloppy start, and they can't really afford to do that this year. Now, Shels haven't won the league since 2022, believe it or not. Would it be fair to say that really nothing short of winning the league this year is what's expected from the players and the coaching staff?
Yeah, for me, like Shels, top team in this league, the ones that everybody are looking at. From a fan point of view, the Sandy like me, like that's the expectation. Where we expect this team to be. I think the expectation is in terms of is for me the league is a bare minimum. We should be looking at everything, if not the league as a bare minimum. If we don't get that, I think there's big issues.
Yeah, when you consider the investment in the squad, facilities, it's a proper professional setup. And what are your thoughts? There's been a bit of coming and going. There's been younger players leaving. We've seen a few in recent weeks, players coming in from the US and so on. But what are your views at the moment on the how the squad's shaping up?
Yeah, look, I think the squad looks fantastic. Like in terms of the loss of Maggie Pierce, major loss. In terms of, I think, just Maggie's industry, how much covering the ground she does for the team. Christy Gray as well, like a fan favorite because she gave everything when she played for Shels. But in terms of the squad itself, like I think the players that they held on to, the likes of Roma, Kate Mooney, bringing in Avian Clancy, there's still obviously the experience there, and Pearl and Rachel and Noel, and then I just think even the versatility in attacking choices they have. You've got someone like Kate Mooney who, is a busybody, likes being in and around that 6 yard box, but will be, I think, a bit more dynamic. And then they've got someone like Gemma Quinn, who's that kind of big target player. So there is real strength within the squad beyond the starting 11. And then seeing some of the younger players as well, the likes of Maeve Wolmer, who came in from Athlone, and then Eva Sheridan as well, who looks like he'll be getting more of an opportunity. I the Avian Clancy one, I think, was a bit strange. I mean, I think she's a fantastic player, but like, I think when you look at Avian's qualities and compares to what we already have, like, we've got Roma, Alex, Noel. I think last year we kind of struggled a little bit with not having enough defensive midfield cover at times. So I know maybe Owen's pushed Avian to kind of be that player a bit more. I don't know how things are going to look over the course of the season, but I personally would have loved to see Aoife Kelly come in, just because I think she's going to turn into a fine defensive midfield player. And Rachel's not going to be around forever. And then obviously there's the American players coming in, like Maggie and Christy, and the other ones. They're going to be a bit unknown to us. Like, you can watch the highlight reels on YouTube and whatnot, but ultimately it's a new league. They have to get used to new conditions. Some of the pitches aren't fantastic, cold weather, a bit more of a physical game. So only time will tell if that pays off. And I suppose I have been vocal about, the the kind of recruitment strategy in the past of looking to America. I think it's great that our clubs in the league here are attracting US talent, and I think in terms of when I look at a treaty who when I spoke to Kira McCormick, she talks about having trouble really being able to recruit in Ireland, and it being kind of an only option at times to recruit from North America. I think for a club like us, our philosophy should be on kind of nurturing talent and bringing more of our players through our academy into our first team, and the plan B then should be to look to the States.
Yeah, let's talk. Yeah, let's delve into that a bit more, if you don't mind. We've seen two of our brightest stars depart, such as Kate McCarran and Hannah Healy, who I've been watching carefully, which is obviously hugely disappointing because I thought they were the next great hope in terms of the next wave of players coming in. Owen Weirin and his assistant Rory Kirk both spoke in pre-season about having a leaner squad. And to me, a leaner squad is maybe instead of having 25, 26 players, you got maybe 20, 22 players, which is fine. That's completely their decision. But then to bring in two, I would say, very talented players from the US, from what I've seen, Gabby Del Pico and Mackenzie Anthony. But these have to be, I'm sure they have to be paid. They probably have to, I'm sure they have to be fed, accommodated. They have to be integrated. It's a big move for them. What's what's the thinking behind it, and what or where is the return on investment, or how do we measure that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's not this. I think these kind of decisions aren't just down to Owen and Rory. Like, and again, I've openly questioned maybe the backroom staff and the people that are behind the scenes in making decisions as well. Like, a manager shouldn't be tasked with developing a strategy. Their job is to win titles. And I would say they have more of a short term view in terms of, my job as a manager is to get from where I am now in the season to where we need to be at the end of the season, whether that's winning silverware or, securing League football. But you have to have people in the background who also take on the responsibility to develop the strategy, develop the philosophy, and ensure that the manager is maintaining that strategy and philosophy and, meeting the KPIs or the goals along the way. And I don't want it to be a criticism of any kind of player coming in. I know all players come in with the intentions to do as best as they can, but like I just question the kind of long term vision in this because like obviously with players coming in from overseas, like the nature of visas and whatnot, they can't be here for a long period of time, right? So, it's that kind of question: is it's good for right now, but is it good for the wider picture? Um, I was very disappointed to see Hannah Healy go. Like to me, she should have been a priority to keep. To be honest with you, like I don't think she had a great season last year. I don't think she really developed. And I think from Hannah's perspective, she probably had to have a hard conversation with herself, with her family. It's an important time in her career. Um, and I think like for her, she needed to make a decision to kind of move. She was probably looking a little bit at the Ava Brennan situation from the previous season, where Ava's at Shels, not getting a sniff. Nobody really knows, Ava Brennan's name in women's football within Ireland, and then she takes a chance, goes to Bows, and it wasn't as if her kind of development was seen over the course of the season. From day one, Ava was brilliant for them, like fantastic. Looked like she'd been playing in the league for years. Yes, developed over the course of the season, but by the time the season finished, she was nominated for Young Player of the Year. There was talk of her being involved in the Irish women's national team. I had two coaches from the UK on to me about her. So for Hannah Healy, she's probably looking, going, hang on a second, I'm in a setup here that supposedly is the best women's team in the country, and I should be getting all this attention, but my friend over in that's left is it seems to be working out for her. So I do understand Hannah's frame of mind, and I wish her the very best of luck, and I hope one day we'll see her in a green jersey, and who knows, back in a Shels jersey in a couple of years.
Yeah, anything is possible. I think those in the know, such as yourself, Shauna, knew that Ava Brennan was probably, she sort of went under the radar in that move to Bose. But those, as you said, those like yourself who know the ins and outs knew that this young lady is something very special. Um, of course, you can't keep everyone happy. You got big numbers coming through. You got high levels of competition. But yeah, I just looking from the outside, I think it was a little bit strange that the sort of the brighter stars coming through from the academy were either allowed or not managed, and not, or But then again, it's their call. They're getting older, but I think you're spot on. At that age, 16, 17, 18, you want to be playing. You can train all you want. You can listen
Yeah,
to your coaches saying you'll get your chance, you get your chance, but you
yeah.
need to play really, and that's probably where you get the majority of your development.
Yeah, and I think Andy, just to add on that, like I think especially young players, like there's three things that you want, right? Like you want to win trophies, you want to develop, and you want to play for Ireland, and a fourth one of that, or a side effect is that when you're in that position, when you're winning trophies, developing and playing for Ireland, you're getting looked at by professional clubs. Um Unfortunately, from our position as a club, like we haven't had a player near the international team for a number of years now. And, you're talking about success and kind of measuring, having kind of things to measure success by. To me, that's a big one. Like we have to be producing players that are at that level and, are knocking on the door of the national team. And I know people will say, oh, but look, the philosophy now is for them to look to the UK. But Julianne Russell was our best player. That should be a message to every girl across this country. That no matter how much the FAI or the manager there is looking at the clubs in England, if you are looking after yourself, you're putting in the hours here and you're performing week in week out, that chance will come. And I think the young players, like as I said again, um, they it's not just for them about winning trophies. It's also about looking where they started the season to where they ended it. And if they're not seeing any progression, they have to make tough, or their family has to make tough decisions. Parents do, and I think a big KPI or a big thing for Shels this year isn't just trophies. It's also getting our players, back to knocking on that door of the national team, and when there is one or two players from this league being called up, it has to be a Shels player. Can't be anyone else.
Yeah, that is, we love the phrase KPIs, but that's it. We there has to be a sort of a net result to all this investment. Back in your let me take you back to the glory days a bit, Shauna. When you were particularly with, let's say, Arsenal, was there agents sniffing around the game? Because I've heard, you know, in the rumor mill of League of Ireland that there may be agents now, and there probably is. Maybe there isn't, but they're sort of sniffing around our younger players. And if they are, they're certainly on the men's side, but on the women's side, do they have much of an influence on these decisions? Not particularly for the departures from the Shells youth side, but is it something that you may have heard of or seen, that agents are perhaps now dipping their toe in and getting into players' ears at a very young age?
Yeah, look, I've heard of a few scenarios where players have been informed by these agents. Like the one thing that I'm very skeptical about is the fact that a lot of them have very little to no experience in women's football, and it is a very different
It's a
beast
different. It's a different,
completely.
different game altogether, really, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like when I was playing back in the UK, there was a couple of agents around, but generally now we just dealt with the clubs directly ourselves. And I do think there's an important aspect of that, as in terms of just personal maturity. Being able to talk in certain ways and be involved in the conversations. Like I agree with Duff when he spoke during the week about agents. Like they have ulterior motives. There's very few agents that will do amazing things for their players. At the end of the day, they're just more interested in um, putting out a social media post and what they can collect, by a player signing on the dotted line. I will say something though. I do think that the narrative in relation to women's football here in Ireland, when I hear of agents getting involved or it being used, the other one I hear of is, a player has gone from this club to that club for money. We're not at that level yet. There's no club in this country that's offering players, 100 euro, 300, 400 euro more than what they're getting where they are. The reality is players are leaving because they see better opportunities somewhere else in terms of playing, and from a personal perspective. So, like, I don't think agents are getting a big cut either from, a player moving from Shels to Bows or Shels to Rovers. The one thing I would say to any young player out there or any parents listening is, it's not a necessity. In the women's game, I would be having very long discussions with agents about intentions, and I wouldn't be rushing into any decisions, for young players.
Yeah, good to hear. Now, Shauna, you and I are our old school defenders from the defensive union. Um, you mentioned the additions of players like Mae Volmer, who I think actually again has slipped a little bit under radar. I think she's an excellent signing. But Avian Clancy, the midfield is looking good. Plenty of options up front. We got Rebecca Bambi Cutback, Kate Mooney, Noelle Murray, Gemma Quinn, plenty up there. But as I said, from a defensive side, we looked a little light last year, I think. We've seen Lucy O'Rourke developing into a very strong, very talented young right full to give extra cover. But, you know, we have seen that I think Ania Hannon at the moment is going into the new season with a knock. She's going to be out. Is there a case that perhaps Shels could have gone for one or two sort of old school pros just to come in, squad players just to give us a little bit extra cover? Or is Owen Waring perhaps relying on his academy to provide that cover?
Um, well, I mean, I don't think Lucy featured a lot last year, which was a bit disappointing because I watched her in pre-season and she was absolutely excellent. Watching a game against Wexford and she was phenomenal. Without a doubt, probably the best player on the pitch. Marked Kira roster and was fantastic. But for whatever reason, she didn't play an awful lot similar to, Hannah in terms of consistent, intense game time. But I agree with you. I do think we were a little light. And like the likes of Kiva Keenan, she loves defending, right? Like you could see it in her. I think she just loves to defend. And like when you watch great teams, like I was watching the other night, I was watching Real Madrid playing against Atletico Madrid, and like when defenders were making tackles, they were celebrating like they were scoring goals. And they're the types of defenders I think that you really need. And when you want to play fast, attacking, fluid football, you have to have that two or three players that are just willing to kind of want to get involved in 1v1s and tackle and whatnot. Yeah,
Yeah.
look, I've been vocal on it in terms of I do think that we probably needed to bring in more of a defensive minded right back, right centre back, because I did see that as an issue in summer last season. You can be really good going forward all you want, but ultimately, if your job is to defend, you have to be good at the basics. So I hope I'd love to see Lucy play more this year. And I think one person that doesn't get an awful lot of credit or praise, though, and I think she's turned into a fantastic player, is Leah Doyle. I think Leah's been brilliant.
Yeah, I run the Leah Doyle fan club, by the way. There's about 3 members in it, but I've been chanting Leah's praises for many years, and hopefully she has a good season ahead. Now, Shauna, you're not too long out of the game. I'm sure you could still dust off those boots. When we look at sort of the old guard, can I say that very carefully? But the old guard of Pearl, Noel, Rachel, nothing lasts forever, but they're still fit as a fiddle. But do Shells have the replacements coming through, or is it all these things still to be decided in the next year or two? Not that these guys are going anywhere, these ladies, but we have to plan for the future.
Yeah, again, like I'll come back to the word strategy. I didn't see a lot of it last year. And I'm hoping this year we see more young players getting the opportunity. And there was plenty of times in games last year. I think change could have happened, and it didn't. And I don't know whether that was maybe Owen and Rory at the start of the season had thought, oh yeah, like we'll play the younger players, and then as it transpired, maybe some of the older players who have a little bit more of an ego, or their personalities are a bit bigger. They're afraid to drop, or they're afraid to not put on, and how that might affect things kind of clouded those opportunities for younger players. But I do think we need to start looking at the younger players, or what's going to happen when Pearl, Rachel and Noel move on, because yeah, they're not getting any younger. Look, they're aging like fine wine. I mean, the three of them are fantastic, brilliant servants of the game, brilliant servants of the club. But there has to be life after Pearl, Rachel and Noel. And time will tell. I hope that the club have a plan. I hope that they can also stay involved. Either who knows, as managers or coaches, when they do decide to move on. But yeah, the strategy has to be there. Some of the younger players that are coming through from other clubs, as you're getting older, you start to feel it a bit more in the legs. You rely on the brain a bit more, but it comes a point in time when, you do kind of say to yourself, yeah, it's time to move on. I don't know whether the girls are there yet or not. I don't think so. I think they definitely have another year or two. But yeah, I think as a club we need to start, like, look, when you look at Duff and you look at, he's got Paddy Barrett there, he's got Mark Hoyle and whatnot, but like the younger players he has as well, Evan, the younger lads there. So if I was on, I'd be tasking some of those girls that are in that kind of middle age group, the Jess Gargans, the Alex Kavanaghs, the Kate Moonies. It's your time to step up now and take on that leadership mantle. So I want to see more of it this year.
Yeah, well, as we said, the three amigos, they're going nowhere. They look fit as a fiddle, and I'm sure they'll have a big season ahead. Now, this Saturday, Shauna, the action gets underway. As I said, I have the privilege of having you beside me in the gantry for the kickoff against Rovers, Shamrock Rovers. 4 p.m. kickoff time. It's a new one for Shels this year. Hopefully, it'll help to grow the attendances. As a parent of young children myself, I know Saturday mornings into early afternoons are tricky times because they all have activities. But it's good to see the club trying something different, and fingers crossed they continue to push because um, players need that atmosphere. They need a noise, and we have a team here that the club really is and should be proud of. Isn't that right?
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, I say it constantly. These are players that are turning up week in, week out, putting on that jersey, sacrificing their own personal lives. Like, none of them are earning like enough money that they're doing this full time. They're all studying or working, or you know trying to do other things, in an effort to be available and fit and be the best they can for Shelbourne Football Club. So, as fans and as people within the club, in at the board level or in the back room, I think it's important to give that respect and turn up and support them. Yeah, last year, as a fan, was very disappointing. I think there was many times I felt like Angela's ashes in Talca Park on a Saturday, and I hope the 4 p.m. kickoff can help, because look, other clubs like have made strides. Galway, the attendance they're getting, even Bows, and I'm gonna say it, like, our product in terms of our on pitch product is a lot better. The brand of football that we play is fantastic. There should be no reason why people aren't coming on a Saturday to watch these amazingly talented players perform. I think we just need to see more, done. I think the kickoff time hopefully will help, but also more media, more stuff on social media, And I think there has to be a better match day experience, because in saying that, like I did go to some games last year in Dalymount, and it is very good, as much as it's given me a pain in my chest to say that. Um, Galway, the match day experience from a fan perspective, very good. And we need to make sure we're also providing the same for our fans and our players.
Couldn't agree more. So Saturday afternoon, 4 p.m. start. Shels take on Shamrock Rovers. Shauna and I will be there. Before we move on to the next section, Shauna, there was a sad passing very recently of former international Amanda Parks, and didn't get a chance to say it on our main pod earlier in the week, but the sympathies go to Amanda's family, friends, and colleagues all in Cork and at Wilton. And sad time for those people involved there, and best wishes to Amanda's family. Back to our friends in the FAI. I know we all know good people that work there, Shauna. Um, we know some people there who, the jury's out, for example, but we're 2 days out from the start of the league campaign. As someone who's involved in the league, I'm still looking for information. It's not great. The FAI have done little promotion. I try to be fair to everyone. I received a nice media booklet by email on Wednesday with nice photographs and all this stuff. But once again, it seems to me that they're not reaching out to those untapped fans. They're preaching to the converted. If you get me. And again, is this another year? Look, we're sick of always hammering the same old thing, but it has to be said: standards are not raising when it comes to the promotion of the women's league, are they?
No, not at all. I mean, even just playing the President's Cup in Tolka Park, a couple of hours after the men's game the night before, the weather hasn't been fantastic. Like, little things like that, I think all are clear indicators of, what's been happening. And like, I don't know whether there was some kind, like, this kind of thought that, like, oh, like, it's like when the World Cup happened, and there was this kind of assumption that, like, oh yeah, that tide is just going to lift us as well. It'll lift all boats kind of mentality. And I think it's the same thing, because the men's league has obviously had this kind of rebirth or renaissance, that there's this kind of assumption in the powers that be, that's a case of, oh yeah, like, that'll just naturally help raise the status and popularity of the women's game. And it's not the case at all. And I agree with you. Like, I have barely found anything about the women's fixtures, about what's happening this weekend. But, like, in saying that, I'm not going to name any clubs in particular, but I am got some websites open here, and there's some squad lists that aren't even up to date. Um, so I think that, like, at the end of the day, that clubs also have a responsibility to improve aspects of what they're providing from Monday to Friday, and then on a Saturday. And then also the League of Ireland have a responsibility. And I think, yeah, so far we've all been left a little bit disappointed, and we can only hope that, again, and I think, look, the players across the league have done a fantastic job at raising the bar and awareness, and putting the league, the WNL, on the map. And the likes of Perlo, constantly going out and encouraging fans to turn up.
Yeah, well, I will name a club, because before we're about less than 48 hours away from the season launch, kickoff, and before this call, I went onto the Shelburne website, and they're still showing the 2024 squad. Now, I'm sure there's very good reasons why that's the case, but we shall, give them the benefit of the doubt. But as a Shelburne podcast, we now have full time staff to beat the band. 5 or 6 years ago, when I got involved, there was no full time staff except for the CEO, David O'Connor. So I'm putting it out there now that standards need to raise themselves. We have people in place, And if anyone from the club is listening to this, let's get things ready for action now. We're 2 days away from kickoff. Ahead of the President's Cup game last week, Shauna, Monday of last week, so 5 days before the President's Cup final, I reached out to Athlone Town. I received zero reply via email. I was asking for simple information on their squad details. As a commentator, I like to do my preparation. I like to know who's who, what's, everything down to a player's age, what she had for breakfast. It's about professional standards. So, as I said, I received no information from Athlone. Maybe they're all off on holidays. And then very late in the day, we got a squad announcement from Athlone, which I think had 8, 9, 10, 11 new players. Very little information. And then people like myself and the brilliant Grace Macaulay Ryan were left to try and pick through the bones of the Athlone team for last Saturday. Now, that's my little rant over, but it's easy to blame the FAI. It's easy to blame everyone else, but each club has to get their own house in order. Some clubs do it better than others. 9 times out of 10, Shels do an excellent job. But I was quite surprised when I went onto the website there about an hour ago to see Maggie Pierce's face, to see Hannah Healy in a red jersey, and to see who else was there? Megan Smith Lynch and so on. Look, these players aren't here. Let's get our act together before 4 o'clock on Saturday. Now, let me take a deep breath now, Shauna. Here we go. So, good news is that Waterford are coming into the league this year, which is I think is excellent news. That makes it 12 teams. I also still wonder why clubs, big clubs like St. Pat's or Dundalk or whoever else, are still not being put under the hammer to enter in, top women's teams. It just leaves me baffled. So, with the introduction of Waterford, that means there's going to be 22 league games for basically a professional league in many senses. That's still way too short, isn't it, Shauna?
100%. And look, I don't advocate for them just increasing numbers to increase games. Like, I think back to the days when I was playing, like, and you'd be going down to play like the likes of Kenny, and you'd be coming back with an 11 or 12 nil win, and like as a player, that's not enjoyable. Because you play football because you want the competition, you want to go into battle, and that's where players, feel most alive, and what the games you remember are the ones that are tight and competitive. But as fans as well, like, no fan is going to be interested in massive scoreline. So I don't advocate for them just bringing in close for the sake of it and to make up the numbers. I think we could think of better solutions to kind of increase the competitiveness and the number of games we get into the league. But like, we need there needs to be a certain number of things set up. So we need to have a league that's competitive. So, fans want to go to games. Like, for example, in the men's game, like, you look there and Drogheda beat Bows, right, in Dalymount. Who would have thought that would have happened? Then you've got Shels beating Derry very comfortably in the first game of the season, and there's these results that are surprises, and that's what people are interested in, the nature and element of surprise and the competitiveness. So I think that's needed for us in the women's game. Consistency is important. So I think making sure that, there's a game pretty much every Saturday for X amount of time. I don't advocate for big breaks in seasons. I think they kill momentum, and they kill, people getting into a routine of going to watch games. Um, and then, as I said, I think the match day experience has to be improved. So I think you need those three things: really good match day experience, competitive football, and consistent games, for people to kind of really stay interested and get the hook into the league. And yeah, look, I think I don't think anyone's expecting Pats or Dundalk to come in to the season tomorrow or the next day, and announce that they're going to change women's football. Um, but what we do expect is, or I think what would be nice would be for the FAI and these clubs to give us some type of vision or expectation of when they're going to commit to joining the party with this, and helping raise the bar and standards in women's football here in Ireland.
Well, I think he's league director Mark Scanlon said it was the clubs themselves who didn't want to go for the extra round of games because there's extra expense. But if you're spending 4 months in an off season, surely you want to, let's say, make that down to a 2 month off season. You want an extra round of games. You want to develop. You want to grow the league. You want to improve players. But as I said, he said the clubs were not fully behind that. That's just not acceptable, is it? Like, clubs should be banging down his door saying we want these games.
Yeah, I think, from my opinion, again, I think that there's people involved in women's football, National League football clubs, that I don't think should be there. I think we need people who are visionaries, people who have experience in women's football, who are willing to try what they can to kind of move it on. And my question to Mark Scanlon would be, um, I think the thing is to ask is, did he have the right people in the room? Were players surveyed? Go and survey players, ask them, do they want another round of fixtures? Because I tell you, they'd probably say they would. And then on top of that, I think, as I said, there's an awful lot of people who are involved in women's football, probably because they haven't had an opportunity in the men's side of the house, and they want to keep it the way it is because they have a role within it. And I think clubs, if they want to take a step up, things don't become professional overnight. You don't start paying players thousands of euros and everybody goes full time overnight. But professionalism starts with a mindset, and it starts with people who every day are doing the little things, as you said, Andy, making sure websites are updated, making sure that players have what they need to train at the to their their most potential. Coaching staff have everything they need, and they're the ones that are going into these conversations going, look, yeah, right, it could be a stretch, we know we haven't got an endless pot of money here, but at the end of the day, we want to do what's best for the players. The people that are making those decisions to not do an extra round of fixtures are not making the best decision for the players.
Yeah, well, I heard you speaking on the brilliant The Other Three Amigos Last Damas podcast at the weekend, and this subject came up, and your buddy, my old buddy, Collie O'Neill, who, we respect Collie for the work he's done in the game. Not often would I agree with him, but he did come out with certain comments about, as you just mentioned, about the whole area of trying to professionalize the game. Um, would you run us through your comments from what you said on that show, Las Damas? Because I thought they were very, very key in terms of what Collie was saying. And on the opposite side, it seemed that Owen Weirin was trying to advocate for perhaps breaks for players during the season. I mean, now, Owen's not here to confirm that, so I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I thought it was a very interesting chat you had on that show.
Yeah, God, I can't remember what I'd done earlier, Andy, let alone last Sunday, but I'll try and recall. I mean, look,
Do your best, yeah.
Um, like for me, right? I'm very vocal, and I don't say things because I don't particularly like or dislike anybody within women's football. I have an opinion on things, and it's not personal. So for me, like, there's a lot of stuff I haven't agreed with Collie in terms of what he said. Like, in terms of when he starts bringing up players' commitment, I wouldn't agree with that. Yeah, you're always going to have a cohort of players in any league at any level that you could question their commitment to, even outside football, other sports, other jobs, right? But the majority of players in this league are trying their hardest to do the best with what they can. I know for a fact some players haven't stayed or picked Rovers because they just haven't enjoyed the setup. And different strokes for different folks at the end of the day. So I thought that
These
was a
these
bit of
things happen in football, don't they?
yeah,
Sometimes you just don't. It's just not for you.
yeah. It's and look, I thought it was a strange generalization to make that players haven't stuck around or signed because they're not committed. I don't think that's the case at all. I think players make decisions on where they go on a broad array of things, from their careers to where they live to the if they feel like they'll have the ability to develop there, to if they have a chance of winning trophies. So that was strange. But in terms of what Collie said about it needs to become more professional, I agree with that. And if we're to expect the standard of football to increase, the viewership, the attendances, the last thing we need is for multiple breaks in the season. I think to me that's a red flag. If anybody's advocating, I don't know if it was said, who said it, or how it was said, but more breaks in the season is the last thing we need. From a player development perspective to attendances and trying to increase interest in the league. I think, like as I said, I agree with Collie. We need to move to a more professionalised approach. When I say professionalised, I don't mean start signing players on professional contracts. I mean setting the right environment, having the right people involved in that environment, having people with experience, having people with vision, with innovation, with bold ideas, but also discipline, to be able to kind of maintain that environment. And yeah, the concept of gaps, I just don't agree with at all. I don't understand the thinking behind that. I'd love to hear more about it because I just can't rationalize it in my head.
Yeah, well, we all remember the fiasco during the World Cup nearly 2 years ago. I think the league took a it was maybe even a 6 to 8 week break because of that. It was great for the nation to get to the World Cup, but a lot of people didn't see the sort of the flip side to that here domestically. Everything being put on hold for nearly 2 months,
Yeah, and
and
I
like
think
it shouldn't be acceptable.
no, and the funny thing is I remember talking about it back then, and I actually was like, we would we would actually benefit more if somebody could watch a World Cup match on a Friday evening or a Saturday or a Thursday, whenever they were, and then go and attend the game on a Saturday, because you have to grab people while they're hooked, while the interest is there. And I just think we missed a beat with that one. And it's the same with, like, I don't understand. I think Wexford have been the only club so far to host a Champions League round of games. Like, it's so impossible at times for fans or to even drum up any type of attention by your club going off and playing in Latvia. Like, yeah, like, I just think clubs have to be committed to going. And I've said this, I've banged on the door with Shels with it when we got there. Have the competition here, because the kickback you'll get from it will be huge, from people turning up to businesses wanting to jump in it. But again, the old cliche of we haven't got the money.
Yep. Yeah. Well, hopefully things will change. Now, before we wrap up, it only seems like yesterday, Shauna, you were gliding across the surface of Talca Park. Um, but in your opinion, since you've hung up your boots, has the standard of football improved at the top level in the League of Ireland, the Women's League of Ireland?
I think in terms of the quality of talent coming through, I like when I think of the technical ability, and the quality of some of the younger players, I think it's fantastic. Again, this isn't a dig at anybody in particular, or I'm not making this person at all, but I think the standard in coaching and whatnot is still. I still have questions about that. But in terms of the talent that we're seeing coming through from the younger players, yeah, I think we have it in abundance, and we've got a very bright future here. But as I said, my worry is that we're lacking the coaching staff and whatnot to be able to facilitate those players and reaching their full potential. You're always going to have players going off to the UK. The best of the best will always go off there, but what I'm talking about is, I'm not talking about your Katie McCabe's here. I'm talking about the 5 or 6 other girls that were close enough to Katie standard, but maybe needed more time and development. And that's, I still think we see that even nowadays, and that number is getting less and less. In terms of the players that are going on to kind of realize their full potential. So I do think the future is bright, and I'm just hoping that like a couple of years ago we had coaches standard like Sean Marr involved in the league. Sean was a fantastic coach and manager, absolutely brilliant, and I would love to see the likes. And look, Kildove is another example. I would love to see, more of that standard being involved in the women's game.
Here, here. Yeah. So before we wrap up, Shauna, with this section, big league contenders would who would be on your list? Let's maybe just look at Paymount. They've been a little bit disappointing in recent years. They have a new manager, Emma Donoghue. How would you know, look at their chances for the year ahead?
Yeah, look, I don't think you can ever rule out Peamount. I think in terms of some of us done that previously, and then they went and won the league, which I was delighted for them, considering they were one of the most impacted clubs by Rovers, joining the league. So I don't think you can ever rule them out for not for the pure reason that for as long as they've got Karen Duggan playing, they've got that player driving standards, and she's just done phenomenal for Peamount in the league. They have a lot of young, really good talent there, the likes of Jess Fitz, Erin, Ellen, like these players I'm talking about constantly. I know I can understand and I realise why they are closer there about with the national team, because they're of that standard. But I think in terms of the depth of their squad, that's where I'd have the worry. In terms of I don't know whether they have the strength in depth to kind of sustain consistency over the course of a season. But they do have Sive Dial back as well, who for me is a real kind of important piece of the puzzle out there.
Yeah, they will be in the mix, no doubt. I think, as you said, consistency is probably the one thing they need to address. Current champions at loan, they've had a lot of new signings. I was um, pleasantly impressed enough with their performance in the President's Cup. Again, it's going to take them a while to settle in and to find their feet. Colin Fortune as well as a new manager. Winning the league is one thing, Shauna, but retaining it is a very, very different challenge.
Yeah, look, I mean, for me, one of the biggest losses is Laurie Ryan, right? Because like you can have all the flair and talent you want, but you need to have one or two players who are doing all the work in the trenches for the team, and that was Larry. Like, I mean, they lost the cup final. Larry wasn't there. I'm not saying that's the reason they lost it, but like she's a big part of it, and I don't know how they manage without Larry. As well as kind of the other couple of players they've lost, but I think the one thing that they will have, especially in the early days, is the element of surprise. We don't know a lot about these players. We also don't know a lot about these players together. So I think if they can utilise that and get a couple of results and build a bit of momentum early on, that could go their way. But for me, I don't see them being title contenders right now.
Indeed. And I've put down Wexford here. Wexford have been quiet for the last 2 or 3 years, but they're never far off putting up a challenge. Could they be a dark horse this year?
I think so. Like, getting Ellen back. Like obviously losing Avian, they'll be disappointed in that. But I do think they've strengthened in terms of their midfield with bringing in Aoife Kelly. I think that they've missed that over the past few seasons, having an out and out defensive midfielder since Adele Kennedy retired. The only concern I'd have for them is the fact that, like, they were light in defence last year. I think they're without Maeve Russell this year. Nikki Sinnott announced retirement. Abby Tuttle, I think she went to Piedmont. So, I'd be worried for them in that kind of regard. But like when you've got someone like Della Doherty, she's a fantastic defender. Lauren O'Dwyer is back for them again. I think they'll be happy enough to not have their name mentioned. And then, we all know what Ellen can do on both a good day and a bad day for Ellen. She can still, be a force to be reckoned with and score important goals for Wexford. So I'd have no doubt that they'll be happy enough to go under the radar, but I wouldn't rule them out for pushing it right to the end.
They're one to keep an eye on. That's just three teams. We're not going to go through everyone because we could be here all night. Just before we finish, Shauna, and thanks so much for your time as always. Recent women's national team manager Carla Ward was at the President's Cup game, which was good to see. Nice to see her in Talker Park. She's spoke, I think, quite honestly about looking at League of Ireland players, trying to perhaps give them an opportunity. Is that just, nice words, or is there any real prospect of a League of Ireland player being, sincerely considered for selection? Because we saw with the previous regime a number of excuses and reasons, but then we see that the squad that's selected for a lot of Ireland games consists of players who, although are playing in the UK, they're actually not playing very regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry, I lost you there for a minute, Andy.
Yeah, go
But
ahead.
yeah, no, I look, I agree with you. We can only take Carla on her word, right? And I think we have to give her the benefit of the doubt. She's had a rough start, the loss, um, the heavy loss, but then also before that, all the stuff that she had to kind of deal with the media attention, with Denise's comments, and the situation with Healy and whatnot. So I think we just have to give her the benefit of the doubt. Like, if she's wise, she should basically look back and see that Julianne Russell, who was playing in our league here, was their best player for the last campaign by a long shot. So I think she'd be stupid not to kind of cast our net as far as it can. I mean, as you said there's a lot of players not playing, and I think if she's looking at players and giving game time to players who haven't got clubs, I mean, she might start looking at the likes of myself again. Who knows? But I think that yeah, she should look to the League of Ireland. But I will say that, and like, I'm not. I've been very vocal about the fact that I don't like the fact that we haven't got any players in the national team that are playing in our league here. The one thing I do, think that is very important is Julianne Russell spoke about how dedicated she was. She was up at the crack of dawn in the gym. She was going and training with boys' teams in the evenings. If players in our league want to get the attention of Carla Ward and get opportunities, it's not going to happen from just scoring 2 or 3 goals against a DLR or a WNL team on a Saturday. It will be in what you're doing away from this league that will either make or break your opportunities to get into that squad, and that's what I think players have to be cognizant of and keep that in their mind.
It's the sacrifices that no one sees, isn't that? Is that what you're referring to?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I think, like, I go back to my myself when I came back playing, when I joined Shels. Like, I went on a good run, and I know there was a bit of frustration across the league because I'd only kind of come back after taking a 2 year break, and people were kind of saying, why is Sue Ronan asking Seana to come back in again? Now, I didn't take Sue up on it just because I had decided my time with international football was done. But, like, I think back then, and like, I was the same as what Julianne was doing. I was out on the pitch when I wasn't training with Shells for 2 or 3 hours a day. I was in the gym in the morning. Knowing Julianne, I know she would be doing that to a lot more than I was. So yeah, it's what the players are doing. When they're not with their teams, and I'm not talking about going to a training session with somebody that puts counts down and then puts a video up on Instagram. I'm talking about actually putting in the hard yards and the gym sessions, the conditioning, the early mornings. That's what will result in players in this league getting to that level and those opportunities with Carla.
Yeah, well, they say that's what separates the very good from the very best. Thanks for that, Shauna. Brilliant as always. Just before we finish, we have a question from my co-host Dunny, who is hopefully in enjoying his evening. He's not with us today, but he's curious to hear your thoughts on the new second tier European competition that was announced recently and how it might affect Irish teams.
Yeah, in terms of women's football.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Well, look, I think any decisions that are made that can help increase the opportunity that our players here get to play against and test themselves against clubs outside and beyond our league is fantastic. Um, I think there's going to be pros and cons that come with it. Obviously, financial implications. Will clubs have the money to be able to support that? But I'm for any opportunity that increases the number of teams that we have that can go and compete in Europe. At the moment, we've only got one. I would love to see that get to 2 or 3. and I think that will really help strengthen the league as well. So look, I think it could be good. Um, but I think it'll have to be done in a way that remains competitive. Like when Piemont got to play against Paris Saint-Germain here in Ireland, that lives in the memory of a lot of us female football fans, because it was Paris Saint-Germain, you know what I mean? Like the big names are coming to town. It will only work if that happens, if there still is opportunities to bring the big teams here or play the big teams. I think if it's just a case of, you know, little old Shelburne, as they're called, playing, some team from Latvia or, Slovakia or whatnot, will that help us grow? I don't know. I'd question that.
Well, there's a lot to, yeah, that's all to be decided in the months and hopefully the years ahead. Shauna, any final thoughts before we let you go? I know you're raring to go for Saturday's co-commentary with me. I can feel the enthusiasm. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, no, is this podcast going out before Saturday,
It
Andy?
is, yeah, it is. It's going out tonight.
Well, I suppose the only thing I'd say is to anyone listening, like, it's so vital that you get yourself down to Talca Park on Saturday. Get down, support the girls. Promises to be a fantastic game, and just be a part of it this year. It'll be an exciting season if the fans turn out and support the players, and they really do deserve it. So I do we ask people to encourage people to get out to Talca on Saturday.
Yeah, it's one of the big fixtures in Irish history. Shels against Shamrock Rovers. It doesn't matter if you're playing them in football or tiddlywinks, there's always that edge. And as Shauna said, we'd absolutely encourage everyone to try and get down for the new 4 p.m. kickoff time. Shauna, I just want to thank you again for your brilliant assessment, analysis, and input. We hope to speak to you again throughout the season. And we wish you well, and we shall speak to everyone next week.
Thanks, Andy.